Good morning, North America. Welcome to Church Talk, lively conversation for all things church transformation. I'm your co-host, Dr. Bill Tenney Britton, in our studio in Columbia, Missouri, the heartland of the U.S. And I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, author and denominational leader, Dr. Kris Tenney Britton, the area minister of the Northeast area of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ of Mid-America. Try and say that 3 times fast. Good morning, Kris.
Good morning, and welcome to Church Talk Live.
Bill and Kris Tenney Britton here today to talk to you, well, actually, to ask you, what is your sign saying? We're talking about church signs today.
I was going to say, we're not talking about horoscope signs or astrology
or here's your sign.
Here's your sign. Yes.
Although we might be talking about here's your sign.
Well, we got some pictures later on,
yes,
don't we?
We'll be interspersing them throughout the show.
Yes, or I have to say that there is my favorite sign that I saw lately at a church where I'm not always really excited about their signs, and drove by there yesterday and noticed that there was nothing on the sign. What was that sign saying? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, well, you know, what we want to talk about today is about marketing on a shoestring, specifically related to the sign. And I can tell you that the most expensive marketing that you have is not using your sign appropriately because, frankly, folks, it's a fairly steep investment to invest into a sign. So if you're going to use one, whether you're using a regular message board sign or a church sign or some sort of supplementary signs, you want to make sure you're using them in a way that is effective for what they're designed for. And we'll talk a lot more about that in a little bit. But not using them at all if you have them, that's a real costly mistake.
Well, I don't think people understand how important those signs are. And I'll tell you, one of my favorite stories about signs is with a woman who had never had experience with the church, never in her life, and had a lot of stuff going on. She met with a group of friends. In fact, they got together almost every Saturday night, sat around, had drinks, and whatnot, and conversation, and would share what was going on in their lives. And she would share these terrible things that were going on, and her life just kept careening farther and farther out of control. And she lived up the street from a church. And over the years, she drove by that church, and they would advertise programs that they had going on and whatnot. And finally, there was this, she saw this one piece out there, and she wondered, I wonder if that could help me. But several weeks, passed on by, and she finally decided one Saturday night, I'm going to try God. Nothing else has worked. So when it came time to choose a church, she went to that church, even though there were other churches, because she had seen that sign and something advertised weeks earlier that she thought might help. She said, I went to church that next morning, no idea what I was going to find, and I never would have expected to find a number of my friends that I had been sitting with there talking about my life and my troubles, and found out a number of them were members of that church.
And hadn't invited her. Not
only had they not invited her, she had no clue they even went to a church. So it was that sign that brought her there.
Well, and we're sort of ahead of the game, but National Evangelistic Association studies some years ago discovered that approximately 10% of all first-time visitors come because of a church sign, because of what they read on a church sign.
We were sharing that just a couple of days ago, and I remember asking you, 90% of people come because they or somebody invites them to come to church. So that made me wonder, if you've got 90% of people coming because someone invites them, does that mean the other 10% come because of the sign? Well, I don't know. But it's a pretty good deal.
Well, when it comes to, when it comes to cheap marketing, or if you will, marketing on a shoestring, there's 3 primary, least expensive ways, inexpensive ways, essentially, to do marketing. And of course, the first is inviting, word of mouth marketing.
Yeah.
This is the number one, most effective, least expensive marketing. But if your members aren't inviting, then you have a problem. And the reality is your members don't invite, you can't grow your church. That's just how it is. And we have episodes on that, and so we invite you to go take a look at those. Also, Net Results Magazine has run a number of articles on how to increase your inviteliness, if you will. And if you weren't at the National Evangelistic Association National Evangelism Workshops, you missed several good workshops on that very deal. So, word of mouth marketing is number one. Number two is your website. Now, the statistics continually show, and these are statistics not only by church experts and marketing experts, but by secular as well, is that approximately 85% of all first-time visitors come after they've checked out your church's website. So if you don't have a website, you're missing the boat completely. And if your website is designed for reaching or appeasing your members, you've missed the boat as well. Your website is a marketing tool. Use it as such. And third, the next little, if you will, is using your church sign. Now, I want to say that church signs, if you don't have one, are not cheap. And the new ones that have the changing high color LED changeable message board, well, those are really expensive, especially at this point. They're still sort of new in the game, but they're likely to stay relatively expensive. That's an investment, and that's when we talk about cheap, we don't mean that. We're talking about cheap because probably your church already has a sign. If it doesn't, this will not be a cheap investment, but we can tell you that after you've checked your local sign ordinances for your community, if you don't have a church sign, get one, and get one that will attract attention, that has a changeable message board. But most of the show is going to be about your church signs and presumably generally existing church signs.
For the novices out there, when he says changeable message board, that doesn't mean it's necessarily an LED changing message board. It means you can change the message on the board.
Right,
and,
adding those little letters one at a time.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Presuming, of course, you have enough, V's
but
or
we're not
whatever.
Go there.
Right, exactly.
Invest in enough.
Right, invest that you have enough, exactly. Okay, so we're going to talk about two different classes, if you will. We're going to talk about of external signs. We're going to talk about marketing signs specifically, and those are church signs and message board signs and any supplementary external signs. And then we're also going to talk just briefly about your other external signs, your parking signs, your entrance signs, your directional signs, and so on, because those are key, because if people drive onto your property and can't find out where to go or get out of their car and they're lost, you're in trouble too. So, but we're primarily going to talk about the main bulk of this. We're going to talk about the church sign, the message board sign, and supplementary signage.
Okay.
So, all right. Well, let's start off by talking about church signs. And when church signs, it's sort of an artificial category, if you will. When I've talked about the three different kinds of signs, a church sign is the sign that a lot of urban churches and churches built in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s that had a sign that was attached to the building, and that was the primary sign. These signs were designed specifically for pedestrian traffic. Go ahead.
Okay, well, we need to say that this is the sign that says First Methodist Church, First Presbyterian Church, First Christian Church, whatever, First Second Baptist Church. That's the church sign that we're talking about. It identifies the church.
Right. Well, but it does more than that. A lot of them were in these glass cases.
Sure.
And they have the name, title of the sign. Sometimes they have the address, which, by the way, can be very helpful for those who are using GPS these days. But then they also have like the name of the pastor. And sometimes they have a changeable section where you can change and add some sort of message. They're normally relatively small, not exclusively, and they're normally either attached to the building or they're parallel with the sidewalk or the streets. So, someone passing by in a car isn't going to be able to read it. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with this kind of sign, particularly if you are in a high pedestrian area. If you're depending on street traffic, cars, to see this, your sign's almost worthless unless people are stopping right there because a stop sign or whatever, and it's somehow attracting attention.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay.
You want to say anything? Okay.
Keep going. Keep going. No, I don't have anything to add. You're doing a great job.
Okay. These signs may or may not have a message section, and if they do, you're going to want to listen to the rest of this because we're going to be talking about the message.
Stick with us.
Right, stick with us. But whether they do or don't, there's some things that need to be on that sign. First, today you need to have the days and the times of your services. That's the number one thing that people are looking for outside of where you are. And of course, if it's the church sign, they found you. But they want to know what day and what days and what times your services are. So if it's, well, whatever, you want to have them all down there. You also today want to have your internet address, your web address on there. That's an absolute must anymore, that's available. And then finally, you want to have contact information so that, if someone wants to contact you, either a telephone or an email address or whatever, so that they can do that. They also should be lit in good repair. Key word.
And in good repair, yeah.
Yeah, lit is a key, because a lot of churches that have either don't light them or have stopped lighting them, or just hasn't paid attention to that little 6-inch fluorescent bulb has burned out. They should be lit, and they should be in good repair. That means they should be well painted and so on. Remember, your sign is saying something, and you want to say something that is positive about your congregation.
Now I want to jump in here and say something that's going to apply in all of these pieces. Be careful about how much information you put on that sign.
Well, here, take a look at this one.
And that's only one example of many, many, many that we see often. And, if you're driving, again, these are pedestrian signs we're talking about, but a lot of times people are just passing by, and you've got to get it there, get it moving. And this is another time to say, whatever that internet, your web address is, you figure out how to have something that's quick, easy, memorable on that sign so that they can keep on going. Because if they're walking, they're not probably going to write down what your internet address is.
Yeah, and it needs to be memorable. One of the things I see so often is churches use alphabet soup. And, there's a whole bunch of letters that have no meaning. If you're First Baptist, and firstbaptist.com is taken, I can assure you it is, then you look at what you can do. You can write First Baptist Peoria or whatever. Don't use fbcp.org. No one knows what that is, and only your church members know. So your web address, URL, needs to be memorable. Reaching out in love is a good one that was used by a church that had an alphabet soup. Okay. So moving on.
Yeah. Let's talk about message boards.
Okay.
Okay. And so these message boards are they're definitely supposed to change on a weekly basis.
Well, on a regular basis.
On a regular basis, but near weekly, because they're really trying to tell us what's coming.
Current, yeah.
Yeah, what's happening. So say some more about that.
Well, the first thing is the message board sign should be perpendicular to the road so that people can see it as they're driving by. If it's this way, they can't see it. And we'll talk a little bit more about letter size and all that in a moment.
But we have pictures of that.
Well, yeah, exactly. And, the perpendicular to the road means that, it's on both sides, generally speaking. And it also means that if you're going to have it on both sides, that one side may need to have larger lettering because it's facing the opposite side of the street. So be thinking about that kind of thing.
Well, I want to jump in here about this size of lettering. I've worked with church signs for a long, long time, and our handout this week has details about the size of lettering, and this is so important. We were at a sign company about, quite a few months ago to get a sign, and I hadn't really thought through all of that, and there they were saying, here are fonts that are good if these are the kind of signs that you have. Here are the sizes that you need if you want it to be seen so far away. And things like you want 4-inch letter size to be read at 150 feet if you're driving because at 25 miles an hour, people only have 5.5 seconds. If they are driving 35 miles an hour, they have just under 4 seconds. And it's like, oh my gosh, okay, there that is. And how much can you read in those few seconds? So you're going to be wanting to think, how fast does traffic go in front of my church? And how much room do I have? What do I want to say? It makes us really get to be concise and
marketing savvy.
Yeah, clear clear about what it is that we are trying to communicate there.
Right. And there's a table in the handout that you can look at for various size of letters and whatnot. But you want to be thinking about that completely, because letter size is based on the distance from whoever is looking at it, so on the road. And again, if you're looking at a 2-lane or 4-lane road, the distance on one side of the sign, you may need to have larger letters on one side than the other. And it also has to do with speed. You know, how long do they have to read that sign? And if you have a sign that, like the one we showed you, that was also not perpendicular to the road, but even if it was, there's no possible way you could read that without literally stopping. So you want to, have your signs, the size of your letters, and the number of words. You want to have them set up for thinking of how are they going to read these. Okay, lit and repair. They have to be well lit and good repair. Again, they need to look sharp.
Right.
And again, your sign. Normally, these message signs are also serve as a church sign.
Right.
They normally have the name of the church. They often have the address. But you also want to make sure you have the days and times of worship services. You want your internet URL, and you want contact information. Those are just the normal things you want on every church sign, including a message board sign. Having a message board sign without telling them that you're First Church is sort of pointless, and whatever. They need to know your church, for one thing.
Well, and you're always welcome to disagree with me on this one, but
Not me.
Yeah, I know. I really am thinking that it's more important to have your website in larger letters than it is the name of your church.
That's absolutely true.
Because more than likely, people know the name of your church, and if they don't, they probably don't even care.
Right.
But they do want to know where to get that information. They if you will, need to know. They might argue with you on this, but really, what you're communicating is what you think people need to know. And quite honestly, they don't need to know that you're First Baptist Church. If they know where to look up and get more information, obviously they already know where you're located, so they can put these other pieces together. So if you're having to trade out size pieces on your sign, make sure that URL is huge, and you can compromise the name of your church slightly by that.
Well, and just to add to that is that no one cares about your denomination either. Nobody, yeah, no, sorry.
I know.
But the only people who care about your denomination are people who already go into your denomination or who are looking for your denominational church. And the reality is, folks, is that's a fast shrinking minority. That the majority of people don't care about your denomination. They don't care that whether you're Baptist or Lutheran or Methodist or Presbyterian or whatever. They're looking for a church where they can fit in, where they can find the answers to the questions of their life. And they have no idea about the differences of theology. So if you want to put your affiliation in there, really, you may want to just leave it to your logo, your denominational logo, and stick it over in a corner somewhere. Don't make it the most prominent thing, because again, no one or very few people anymore care, and that's a growing audience. The majority don't care. All right, go ahead. You guys have anything?
I was going to add.
Okay,
I was
right.
going to keep us moving here and
All
say
right.
that these signs need to be guest savvy, no insider language.
Right.
I saw
We'll
something
talk more about all that in a little bit.
Okay,
Just a
well,
moment, but-
okay. So I want to finish that sentence
Right.
though and say that I saw a piece on a sign, and I was realizing, what on earth does that mean? Had no clue whatsoever. And I'm pretty church savvy, but I obviously wasn't guest savvy for them.
Right, exactly. Well, and you never know what people have in their minds. And we're going to talk about what the content of your message needs to be to reach people in a moment. We're going to do that all in one big section.
Okay.
But hang on, because it's coming.
Okay.
The last piece I want to talk
Preview.
about, preview, that's right. The last thing we want to talk about is supplementary signs. And those are signs that can be anything from billboards, which, by the way, can be very effective advertising, not necessarily inexpensive, but good advertising, to the banners that you throw up on PVC poles. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. Banners are fine, PVC poles are not. Or against the side of your building or whatever, to let people know what's going on.
Well, I want to say about supplementary signs, though, you were saying billboards can be very, very expensive, but one of the favorite signs for one of the congregations I get to work with, as you're coming into as you're getting ready to pass by the town, because they moved the highway, and now the church sits at the end, or one of the churches here sits at the end of a road that has a blockade at it. You can't go through it anymore. Anyways, one of the members owns property, and so they have a almost billboard-sized sign not as tall as a billboard would be, but it is huge and honking. And it says, this church welcomes you. Come join us, and then has that information. And I see it. Even I don't see a lot of signs, but it's right there in front of me as I'm coming, coming through, and it makes me smile every single time.
There you are. Okay, so what are supplementary signs doing? They are supplementary to your church sign, to your message board sign. They're additional signs to attract attention and to market. Please remember, this is about marketing. I really understand the Jesus saves signs, although that means less and less to people today. And biblical references, John 3:16 signs, that means nothing to people today unless you've been in church. People think about a wrestler.
I was thinking Phil 4.4, and
right, and
who the heck is Phil?
Exactly. And it goes on. Is that a reference to Dr. Phil? So people don't know that stuff, and so these signs are marketing. They're marketing specific, and I know some of us don't like that word, but let's just call it what it is, whether we like it or not. Even an invitation, a personal invitation, is marketing. It's word of mouth marketing. And so we just have to sort of say, we're getting past this language. It's about marketing. It's about letting people know what we're doing, what we're offering, what's going on. So let's talk about supplementary signs. First is, no matter whether you're doing a billboard or whether you're doing a vinyl sign, a vinyl banner for Vacation Bible School, it needs to look sharp. Here's a couple of examples of signs that don't look sharp. Here's one that is, you can see that's PVC poles, it's saggy, it is just, all right. Here's another one that's an entrance sign, and you can see that it was done in a marker that when it rained, it ran. Folks, your signs need to communicate the class of your organization.
Excellence in all things. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to be excellent.
Right. So, use a real signpost, or use, if you're going to do the vinyl banner, put them on some sort of a pillar post that's going to stay up straight. And if the wind comes up one night, go and check your sign first thing in the morning. Don't leave it and let it get, and if the sign starts to fade out, it's time to remove it. Supplementary signs, again, need to have, if they're separate from the church somewhere, they need to have daytime web and contact information. You need to have whatever information you need to have that they need to get from that sign as if it's by itself. And again, the message has got to be guest savvy.
Yeah, well, let's talk about message, because now we've talked about church signs, message boards, supplementary signs, but we keep referring to the message.
There we are.
So let's spend these last few minutes that we have together talking specifically about the message.
All right. Well, let's start off by saying that your message matters. Remember that NEA study that I told you about earlier, that 10% of all first-time visitors show up because of a sign? Similar research shows that nobody comes because you have a cute, clever sign. Nobody comes because you have a sign that says CH_RCH, the only thing missing is you. You don't see McDonald's with hamburgers with the -U, the only thing missing is you. Those are lovely and clever, but nobody comes to your church because of those signs. Lots of people will notice them and have comments about them, but no one comes to your church because of them.
Well, as you're talking about McDonald's, I'm thinking over what billions served. And to be able to say in a church, I'd love to see this sign, over 100 lives changed this year.
There you are.
Over 5, lives, 10 lives changed this year. Those signs that say, we haven't had an accident in so many days. Let's turn that into,
we haven't lost a member in so many days.
Oh my goodness, yes. But you're absolutely right. And my husband is given to overstatement at times. And when he says the studies show that, no, I can hear people saying right now, some of you are saying, well, so-and-so came to my church, or blah, blah. But think about that through the ages. How many have come because of that? And it's very, 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 very few.
It's exceptionally rare, and it's normally they didn't come because of your sign. They came because someone else invited them, or they checked out your web address or whatever.
Yeah,
something.
Yeah.
But here's the deal, folks, is use your sign for what it was created for. It's a marketing tool. It's an invitation tool. It does the inviting in place of a member looking at someone and say, gee, would you come because we have an anonymous meeting going on, and I really think you need that anonymous meeting or whatever.
Right. So here's that question that we ask pretty often. What is your mission? What is your vision? Who is it that you are supposed to be reaching? And that's who your sign is geared for. If your vision, if God's vision for your church is to reach people who have biblical literacy, then maybe that biblical reference abbreviated is for you. Although it's not invitational, really, it's threatening in a way. If you don't do this, then that's what's going to happen to you. That's not inviting.
Where do you want to spend eternity? Smoking or non-smoking? Okay, that's clever and but offensive to people who do smoke. Which I get. Okay, so you don't want smokers at your church. I understand that. Okay, you're going to throw all your smokers out. But okay, so you're not. And then why would you intentionally offend them and offend those who are driving by? If you want the people who are outside the church to come, invite them to something that they would be interested in doing. And folks, that's the key here. Invite the people to an event that is relevant to their lives. So, you're talking about mission and vision and all that.
Right.
If you're trying to reach young families, then you want to invite them to things that would appeal to young families. You may want to say nursery and childcare available on your sign. Or you might want to say that you may want to do a sermon series on parenting. But they're probably not the only people that you have events for. You may have a seniors group that does travel. Hey, if that's open to people, tell your seniors in the community, hey, we have a senior trip to the Tulip Festival, free or $5 reservation, whatever, and here's how to get contact information. Invite them to what's going on. Get them into your presence so that people can connect.
Come see the world with us, our senior travel group.
Right, there you are.
Thursday at 11.
Right. Now, if you're aiming at people who are outside of your denomination and who are outside the church, then don't use Bible references. In terms of like Phil 4:4, or even that we're going to be studying the next sermon series is the intricacies of Romans chapter 12. That doesn't mean anything to people. You want to title your sermon series, which by the way is a great thing to advertise if you have a relevant sermon series coming up for your community or those who you're aiming at. Tell them about it. But let's make sure your titles are informative and attractive and aren't coded. Make sure that they're invitational to these folks. And we have some, again, you've seen some pictures already of good ones as well. Your creativity comes there. It's not in your clever lettering or your clever aphorisms. It's in your clever titles that attract and arouse curiosity, but say, that's something I need to hear.
Well, let's be real. When you're saying this, you're thinking that the pastors have the creativity and they're the ones doing that. But as a former church secretary and administrative assistant, I can tell you that often it was me who was, and more often than not, in fact, all the time, I changed that sign out there for 7 years and tried to come up with the pithy pieces. And so pastors, if you're the ones listening to this and your titles aren't so creative, then put a creative team together and put up a sign team or a sign committee or whatever.
This is a marketing.
Right.
This is a market. If you have a marketing team, they should be the ones doing this.
Right. So and get them with your input and with your okay.
Of course.
You want that creativity, and how can they take what's going on, put it in a pithy, quick, informative way that brings a smile to the face.
Right.
I mean, that's
when it's
the
possible.
Other piece. Right, exactly.
Right.
But have that into your mind. So today we've talked about these church signs, message boards, supplementary signs, and whatnot. We would be remiss if we did not put one more word out there about our exterior, we'll say other exterior signage such as parking, entrance, and directions. We found very interesting this one parking lot where there were handicap parking signs everywhere, but there were no other markings about what doors to go in. And there were a multitude of doors you could choose
from. And in fact, we're going to close with this video, and we'll come back just after this video to say goodbye. But take a look. This is a real church. This is really what happened.
Okay, I thought this is where I was supposed to go, but where am I supposed to go? Well, that looks like the garage. Okay, Family Life Center, worship, Sunday school worship. So is worship in Family Life Center? Have I gone in the right place? I'm not seeing anything. Let's see. Welcome. They're very friendly, it looks like. And youth room. Just a bunch of stairs. I feel like a fool. I'm not sure where I'm going. No greeters. That would have been nice. Looks like there's no place to go but up. All right, we'll just try up. Is this the lobby? LF must be lobby floor. That must be it, the lobby floor. Okay, but all right. Not seeing anything about this worship space. Main floor. Let's try the main floor. Hopefully it's the worship floor. Oh my gosh. Okay. It is the empty floor. More stairs. And I'm not seeing, I'm just gonna stay down here.
Now, we weren't in her mind, to be honest with you, but we did have a conversation with this woman who, hey, what can we say? Folks, your signs are important. If people get interested in what your marketing sign, your message board sign has said, and they show up, don't leave them lost. Help them find their way into your worship center, into your auditorium, into your sanctuary. Hey, and when all else fails, put a greeter outside. That's where they ought to be anyway. We're out of time. Have a great day. We'll see you next week.
Have a good week.